We would like to
Alrighty.
welcome Fred Hewitt from the Northwest Energy Coalition today, talking about the future of geothermal in Oregon. Fred is a senior policy associate for the Northwest Energy Coalition, and he's uh, has extensive background in energy and climate policy. And we think that this presentation will go well with another presentation that we had about 3 months ago on small nuclear power plants. So Fred has said, please feel free to ask questions as he goes along with his presentation. Fred, it's all yours.
Sure, and thanks for bringing me back. Uh, I've been following geothermal in Oregon for decades, since the 80s, and there is a lot of that has actually happened, um, and a lot more that's going to be happening, already happening, and will be happening in the near future. So this is a good topic to take up right now. Geothermal's always had tremendous potential here, but it has taken a long time to get very much going. And I think now we're going to really be seeing that. So, what is first to say about geothermal? Geothermal, broadly speaking, is heat in the Earth's surface and interior. Much of it comes from kind of remnant heat from the beginning of the planet and ongoing uh, nuclear radiation activity in the core, which the heat from that migrates up toward the surface in a pretty consistent way. Geothermal heat is available everywhere on the Earth. If you go down deep enough, you can get hot rock if you want. And of course, the deeper you go, the hotter it gets, but the more expensive it gets and the more difficult it gets. So, geothermal power is one part of the issue here. The other is geothermal, and we'll not be talking today much, unless you want to, about geothermal heating and cooling, which is lower temperature heat that's closer to the surface. We actually have some of that in Oregon as well, and around the region. And of course, if you've been to Iceland or New Zealand, they have a lot there. But I'm not going to talk today much about geothermal heat and cooling. So, for any kind of geothermal, you need three things. You need heat, which is everywhere below the surface. You need permeability, a way for that heat to move, and you need a fluid or some method of flowing the heat. Many places have one or two, but not all three. Where there is various kinds of geological formations that allow heat and permeability and fluid to happen near the surface, that's where we find hot springs. That's where we find volcanic formations that provide access relatively close to the surface, and so forth. And Oregon has all of those things. There are two conventional types of geothermal power systems. Basically, you drill a hole into the surface, you go down.
Fred, could you put the PowerPoint onto slideshow mode? The text is rather small.
I've got it about as large as I can probably get it, and I'm not, I'll send these slides around. The details are, I'll just briefly mention them, and these are really just kind of generic diagrams, actually. But just
Is
to
this
indicate that,
is this is this
yeah,
something that I should change from as the host
no,
or
and finding a PowerPoint, unfortunately, is so difficult to work with. So I'm just going to leave it the way it is.
okay.
Uh, and just, I'm going to not spend much time on these slides anyway. With a traditional, what's called hydrothermal power plant, which we have some in Oregon, you put a pipe into the surface, you drill down a few hundred to a few thousand feet, you find a spot that has heat, uh, permeability, and fluid. You bring it back up the pipe, you bring the fluid up the pipe, and either run it through, if it's hot enough, it's going to be in the form of steam, which can run through a flash plant. That's a very simple thing. If it's a little bit cooler, it can run through a binary plant. And typically those also re-inject, both kinds can re-inject the fluid back into the ground. so you don't really have much consumptive water use. Uh, we have in Oregon, we have binary plants, and I'll get to that in a moment. This is a pretty simple and straightforward approach, actually. Typically, by the way, in a flash plant, you'll just use a simple steam turbine and generator. In a binary plant, usually uses what's called an organic Rankine cycle turbine, which basically can be used for below the heating, below the boiling point of water. So another kind of conducting fluid is used, usually isopentane or something like that. I'm not the expert on all of that, and the engineers here, I'm sure, will have lots to say about the kind of turbines that we can use. But geothermal is a pretty straightforward thing. It involves you drill and then you have pumps and you have turbines. It's really pretty simple. The new kind of geothermal is called enhanced geothermal, and the enhancement is because of some additional work that happens underground. Enhanced geothermal borrows techniques from oil and gas fracking, uh, which includes horizontal drilling techniques and also methods to loosen up the rocks through what's called plug and perf or various other names for that. In oil and gas, they use slick water, which is basically kind of additives into the water, typically not very nice chemicals to help prop the openings and keep the permeability going. And enhanced geothermal doesn't use the advanced, kind of nasty chemicals, but it can use sand or other things that help keep pore spaces in the rocks open once they're exploded a little bit, and that enables permeability through the system. Typically, in enhanced geothermal, you'll have an injection well to bring down cold water, and then a production well. The cold water goes out through holes in the pipes into the surrounding area, and then as it's heated by the surrounding rocks, the warmer water gets pulled into the production well, pulled up, and run through a power plant. The illustration of the power plant here with the big cooling towers is not actually what they look like. It's kind of a fanciful representation. But the difference is that there is stimulation, that's the technical word, underground, meaning you run a pipe, you run it horizontally, you may run it down maybe 2 miles or more, run it horizontally for a mile or two, and partially explode the pipe to open up holes in the pipe so that water can be injected or withdrawn. And that's how so typically it's a two pipe kind of system. And I'll get back to that shortly. We don't have these yet in Oregon. Here's what we do know about Oregon. There's been a lot of geothermal exploration over many years, a lot of it for minerals and some for geothermal. This is a map based on the Oregon Department of Geology and Mineral Industries work, DOGAMI. This is by the Conservation Biology Institute. They're a nonprofit, I think, based in Corvallis, kind of a spinoff of Oregon State. They do a lot of really great mapping work. This map shows the known geothermal resource areas in Oregon, the ones that have high favorability for geothermal power development. So you can see a little bit up in the Cascades, kind of that squarish bit in the middle there, sort of left middle, that's the Dewberry Crater area. Further down south, we have, things around Klamath Falls and over toward Harney Lake, and also in Klamath and Lake counties. And then the little one up on the kind of east side is in the area around Vail, and we'll see that actually has been developed. So that's the known geothermal. Those are relatively shallow, high temperature, high good permeability areas. Here's what's actually been developed in Oregon so far. We have 4 power plants. I'm pretty sure the Paisley plant is online. We're not entirely sure about that. But the largest one is called Neal Hot Springs. It's out by Vail in the Malheur County. Idaho Power is actually the buyer of that power. It generates actually put on the grid about 22 megawatts, listed here for about 30. Paisley is down in southeast Oregon, down in Lake County. It is about 3 megawatts. It's owned and operated by the Surprise Valley Electric Co-op. I think it's operating. Pacific Power takes that power as an off-taker under PURPA. And then there are two small plants at the Oregon Institute of Technology in Klamath Falls that operate at least somewhat, but they're not very big. So that's what we've seen so far, and you can see how it lines up pretty well with the known geothermal resource areas. There are a couple of areas that there's been exploration, but no actual power plants have been installed yet. Down in the southeast at Crump Geyser, very interesting story, that place. Glass Buttes over on the east side of Lake County, northeast side, and then Newberry, which I'll talk about more next. Newberry Volcano is a very big, here, by the way, here's a picture of Neal Hot Springs. It doesn't have those big, gigantic cooling towers. It just has organic Rankine cycle gas turbines, a whole bunch of them, and then the wells and other stuff on the land. It doesn't take up very much space. That's a 22 megawatt power plant of actual power that goes on the grid. Let's talk about Newberry. I've never been there. Some of you may have been. It's a really interesting place. It's part of the Cascades. It's the biggest, by far, volcanic feature in the Cascade Range. People don't know that. It has a long, interesting geological history. Newberry caldera, really, the volcano, what's left of the volcano, is really large. There are two nearby lakes that are also part of the feature. And the whole area has a lot of lava flows. You can see there's a place called Lava Butte and various other kinds of geological formations. So the Newberry lava plains, as you can see in this geological survey map, cover an enormous area going all the way from north of Redmond nearly down to Fort Rock. So that tells you how big this geological feature is. And what that means is that there's heat and permeability relatively close to the surface. There has been exploration for geothermal power, kind of testing since 1974. This is a long history. I don't even know all of the history, but a fair bit of history. And one thing that happened with the OPEC oil crisis in the 70s, a lot more interest in renewable energy in Oregon of all kinds, but in geothermal in particular, a lot of exploration work started happening at Newberry. Multiple different companies have been there. Some have come and gone, some have stayed. One has stayed, in particular, Rock, which I'll talk about in a moment. Uh, the serious exploration began in the 80s and into the early 90s. This is an EIS for a company called CE Exploration, which originally was called California Energy. They did some geothermal work both in California and in Oregon. They actually filed for a permit and got a project going that got Forest Service, I guess at that time, these days it would be BLM, I guess, EIS. And this is 1994. This is a long time. And exploration at Newberry has been more or less continuous since the late 1970s. First one's in 1974, but more or less, I mean, that's almost 50 years. So there's some interesting history in this. It's a very interesting location for geothermal, high potential, but also not easy. And a lot of the previous wells have found very, very high temperatures, 400, 500, 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and generally come up as dry holes. They couldn't find any associated fluids, and so it wasn't feasible to do any production up to recent times. Now it may be more feasible. You may have seen recently there are two companies that are doing development at Newberry. Um, One called Mazama Energy is actually a previous company that's been there, is still there, called Rock. They're based in Houston. They've been at Newberry for about 20 years now, doing various stages of exploration. But recently they got a US DOE grant and some big outside private equity funding. So they're expanding their efforts and modernizing what they're doing. I do not know them directly very, very much, but they have smart people and they're doing a lot of very interesting work. Kind of a conventional approach to drilling deep and getting really high temperature rock and fluid to produce power. And they've recently gotten a test well that showed a 650 degree Fahrenheit temperature, which is getting up in the range of supercritical heat for water. Supercritical water carries a lot more energy. You have to be about 400 degrees Celsius or 650 or 700 degrees Fahrenheit. It carries a lot more heat transfer potential. So it is this deep hot rock or super hot rock kind of project is a real possibility at Newberry. There's another company, and by the way, Rock and their associated company called Davenport have old leases that predate the formation of the geothermal mon or the Newberry National Monument that are inside the monument area. They have a lot of acreage there leased, and so they can develop in that area. It's more or less on the west side of Newberry Crater. And but there's another company called Quace, which is actually a spinoff of MIT, and they have a different approach to the whole geothermal super hot rock approach. They actually cooperated for a while with Mazama. Now they've split off and they're doing their own development on a new lease area. It's outside, right outside the monument on the south side. That already have a well pad in place. This is a kind of a AI picture of what they're going to be doing, but they already have a well pad and they're already beginning to do a little exploratory drilling. What Quace is doing is quite interesting. They're not doing a traditional drilling approach. They're using gyrotron, which is it uses millimeter wave drilling, which basically doesn't smash the rocks with a drill bit. It melts the rocks, and then the rock stuff is pulled up through the pipe. Well, it's still very early, but they're showing some interesting early results at their test site in Texas on millimeter wave drilling, and now they're planning to do that. After they drill a more conventional, couple miles, they're going to switch to the millimeter wave drilling. That this is their plan to go to the really deep, supercritical heat area. So this is all happening at Newberry, and Newberry is, it's been there a long time. There's been a lot of work there, but it's really kind of the first place of really serious drilling for super hot rock in the world. So all the attention, a lot of media attention is now coming to Oregon for this kind of geothermal. And I can tell you I know only little bits and pieces more about these two projects, but they're both moving forward with big headlines. I would also say they're both trying to create a lot of expectations about these projects that at the same time, you have to consider the difficulties of drilling into, it's difficult enough to go into fairly hot rock. The kind of super hot rock is a major challenge for drilling equipment, for drill bits, for logging equipment. Special kinds of pipe protection will be necessary. There's a lot of unknowns out there. So although the companies are both trying to show this as major steps forward, and they are making major steps forward, the idea of getting actual production at those supercritical temperatures is, in my non-engineering estimation, at least a decade away. So just to put a little bit of expectations around that. But there's lots of really interesting work, and among other things, Quace is donating some funding to Oregon State to do some basic research on geothermal. So there's lots of interesting things going on with Newberry right now. But I think that the more likely build out that we're going to see in Oregon, and there will be maybe some, a smaller amount of production. Both of these companies have announced maybe they'll do like a 20 megawatt or 100 megawatt plant with more conventional geothermal in the near future, next few years. If that happens, that's good. Then we have to talk about how they get hooked up to the transmission and all the rest of it. But I really think that the other kind of new geothermal, the enhanced geothermal, is more of what we're likely to see over time in Oregon, although there are also some constraints. So let's talk about the new mapping of geothermal. Up till the recent times, geothermal power was considered feasible only in places where you had that close to the surface kind of production that was possible because of volcanic or other formations. So, for example, this map doesn't show it. The largest geothermal power plant in the world is the geysers, which is actually, I think, about 15 or 20 different production areas in the mountains just north of Santa Cruz, California. Some of you may have been there or heard about it. It's running right now around 800 megawatts of output. And it goes into the California grid, and we probably use some of it because we're in the energy imbalance market up here. So that is the biggest. And the second, one of the maybe second largest, is down in Imperial County, very, very southern California, right by the Mexican border, where there again, in part because of the Salton Sea and other formations there, there's a lot of heat close to the surface. And my recollection is there's about 500 megawatts of active geothermal down there, with more coming. New, uh, sorry, the geysers is also, there's also some expansion work going on there. We'll see how it goes. There's some interesting new technical work going on there. But those kinds of places, and as I showed before, the known geothermal resource areas in Oregon and some in northern Nevada and in western Utah, basically the Great Basin, have been the targets for geothermal development for a long time because they were the most, available and feasible places to go. This new research from Stanford University shows the geothermal potential for enhanced geothermal is far larger, and actually could be done in parts of the East as well. For example, along as you can see, that kind of orange color along the Texas Gulf Coast and Gulf of Mexico, a little bit even along the coast of Florida up into the mid-Atlantic, and maybe little bits and pieces in the Midwest. In the West, nearly all of the West is a really favorable location, broadly speaking, for enhanced geothermal, where you're able to go down into deep, hot rock, not super deep, but hot enough, dense, deep, hot rock that doesn't have very much permeability, and be able to create the permeability and then put cold water through and bring hot water up through enhanced geothermal drilling techniques. And when you look at the map, what's interesting about it is it's not just the traditional basin and range, which is outlined there on the map, the Great Basin. It's also a fair bit of the uh, up in the Northwest in particular. And guess what? Oregon, most of all. Most of Oregon is potentially developable for enhanced geothermal. Now, my friends at USGS tell me that the rocks aren't so good here on the west side, and there's issues drilling into the lava formations, the lava flow areas, which is much of the state of Oregon. But there's no question Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Western Montana all have significant enhanced geothermal potential, although we're not exactly sure where yet. The maps are very general. The maps are well documented, and they have a lot of really good research underlying these maps. But actually drilling and getting hot stuff is a lot more complicated than just, putting your finger on the map. Here's a look at Oregon's geography a little bit. There are actually 9 physiographic provinces. You can see them all. A little hard to read maybe, but I would say we have 3 major zones. We have the Great Basin, which is basin and range, the Owyhee uplands, and that's basically southeast Oregon. That goes into southern Idaho, most of Nevada, and western Utah, the Great Basin. And for a variety of reasons, that's a very good geothermal development area, both for traditional hydrothermal and for enhanced geothermal. I'll talk about the Fervo project in a moment. They have a little one in northern Nevada. They have a big one in southern Utah. Both of them are within the Great Basin, and they're enhanced geothermal. But the different provinces in Oregon mean different drilling challenges. And I want to point here to what's called here the high lava plains, the Blue Mountains, and the Deschutes-Columbia Plateau, all of which are really in the lava areas, the areas that were covered by the Missoula flood lavas, over many, millions of years, and are different kinds of rocks than the more granite-based underlying rocks in the Great Basin. However, USGS research has also shown that those kinds of lava flow areas are very good prospects for geothermal power. After all, that's what they have in Iceland. They've got lava flows and they got lots of geothermal. But we don't really know exactly where is going to be the best place yet. West of the Cascades also seems to be a possible geothermal development area. It wouldn't be as big as the east. It would be more expensive to do the drilling, but we wouldn't have to find a way to get the power across the Cascades on a transmission grid that's already pretty full. So it's something to consider. It's not going to happen right away. And like I said, when I talked to USGS, they weren't real big on the idea of west of the Cascades, but I think it is actually a possibility. And as we'll see, the development for these geothermal projects takes a lot less land than it does, solar or wind do, for example. So could we put a little bit of geothermal west of the Cascades to, have power and go into our local grid? Yeah, it's at least a possibility. Here is a picture, the last slide really, a picture of the Fervo plant in Utah. This is in Beaver County, Utah, which is sort of south central Utah. It's near some big transmission, so they have access to the California market. And Southern Cal Edison and two California public power, they're really uh, the community choice aggregators, not really full public power utilities, have already bought the output from the first stage of this project. Southern California Edison is getting what you see in the picture. That's a 100 megawatt power plant that is mostly complete. This picture is about 6 months ago, I think. And that will be operating by this fall, and it will be fully online by early next year. So not all 100 goes on right away, but they've already built almost all of it. They're testing it now and ready to go. That first 100 megawatts will make this the first large enhanced geothermal uh, power plant in the world. Frivo also has a small one turbine project in northern Nevada, which is kind of a pilot project. This is the first really commercial scale one. After they finish this first 100 megawatts, they'll put 400 more megawatts at this site online in 2028, all of it also going to California. By the way, if you look in the upper left of this picture, you can see those things sticking up out of the landscape. Those are two big wind turbines. There's actually a 300 megawatt wind farm right next to this. And next to that, there's a 300 megawatt solar farm.
Ah,
And up the valley in the same geological area, but a lot shallower rocks, is the Pacific Power Blundell geothermal power plant, old school hydrothermal plant, which has been operating since the 1980s. It's 40 megawatts. All of that in Beaver County. It's kind of like the renewable hub of the West right now because it has solar, wind, and geothermal and this big new enhanced geothermal project. This is the kind of project I think we will see mostly in Oregon. I think Newberry is kind of a one-of-a-kind, unique place, very interesting from a technology engineering point of view, might produce hundreds or thousands of megawatts eventually. But this kind of project, the more traditional, now more traditional enhanced geothermal, is a bigger possibility for Oregon going forward. There are lots of areas on the east side that could be developed either in the Great Basin area or the lava kind of area. Those rocks are favorable, I think, in both cases. The biggest issue on the east side is transmission. How do you get to the power lines that are already there, and how to build new power lines that can carry geothermal, wind, solar, whatever that we might need? That's another long discussion. So that's pretty much what I've got. Happy to take the slides off here and happy to talk about it and answer questions.
Fred, uh, the power plant that you just showed us, how many acres is involved in that?
Yeah, it's the first one, so it's a little larger than Furrow was aiming for. Their aim is actually to have 50 megawatts on a 50-acre site. It would take one or two well pads, 5 to 10 maybe 10 wells, 5 to 10 wells to do a 50 megawatt plant at about 5 to 10 megawatts per well pair. And that's really not a very big footprint. That particular site is in Beaver County. Beaver County is agricultural and range. They actually had a big Smithfield packing plant there that closed, so they really want this new development. The plant does not take any. It's not an area that has potable water, so it's not taking from irrigation. It's just taking available groundwater to provide the supply, and there's not that much that's really needed. So this kind of footprint is much smaller than solar or wind. Roughly speaking, that 1 acre a megawatt, let's say this is Fervo's target range, and they a wind farm might take 50 acres per megawatt. They're spread out, and you can do agriculture, around that. Solar farms typically take about 8 acres per megawatt, although, we can see a lot more of agrivoltaics now. But the geothermal land impact is really limited, small. Therefore, there are probably a lot more places that it can go. However, that also opens up some interesting new challenges in figuring out what to do about siting, because we never had to really think about siting in, let's say not too far away from Bend would be a good area and just feed the local grid there, or even on the Willamette Valley. We're not yet ready to really look at those kinds of siting issues. But the smaller footprint for geothermal makes it look a lot better from that perspective. And one thing I haven't talked about yet is the cost. Because of the advances that were made in Utah, first at a US DOE funded site called Forge, which is basically a test bed for enhanced geothermal, and then Fervo, which was part of Forge, participating along with a lot of other organizations. The Forge project is actually run by the University of Utah. Forge was able to successfully reduce the drilling cost by about two-thirds, and Fervo has taken it even further by using these new uh, directional drilling techniques and also more advanced drilling bits than were being used. You have to have bits that are drilling bits that are able to go into much harder, hotter rock than you do for oil and gas. So the Forge test bed proved that out, and Fervo was then able to immediately take the next step. So drilling costs now are roughly 75% less than they were projected to be even a few years ago. And since drilling cost is at least half the cost of a geothermal project, along with all the surface equipment and the turbines and the rest of it, that's brought the cost of geothermal down from maybe around $200 a megawatt hour to under $100. Fervo's target is somewhere in the $50 a megawatt hour range. That's just as cheap as solar, wind, and batteries, maybe even quite a bit cheaper than new natural gas power plants, for example. And it can provide power, right out of the turbine, so to speak. The power is there 24 hours a day at kind of a flat rate. However, Fervo's already tested the ability to flex that geothermal output, doing some sophisticated management of the well reservoir area. It looks like some kind of flexible geothermal will also be possible. And that's a particularly good fit, especially for solar, because you have the solar during the day, and then you can run the geothermal, less when the solar is out there, or wind, or whatever it is, and then more when you need more power. A flexible geothermal approach, which still has to be proven at scale, is something that would be the big game changer, because now you could put relatively small geothermal plants in a lot of places on the grid and have them. You want to have solar and wind as well, of course, and batteries, all of it together, and of course, demand response and energy efficiency and you name it. That looks like a really good pathway to 100% clean grid, where we can gradually diminish the use of, well, we're already phasing out coal. We could eventually diminish the use of gas and eventually have a pure renewable power grid in the, foreseeable future, not right away.
Like 20 years?
I'm not going to put a number on it, but I would, let's be optimistic. Um, if I had said to you in 2012, as I did, that solar was going to cost one-third as much as it did then, and batteries about one-eighth as much, everybody would have said, and the utility sure told me this, that was impossible. And now look at where we are. Now, you can reduce costs by more experience, the experience curve idea. Geothermal has already come way down that experience curve. I don't see it going from, $80 or $100 a megawatt hour today for enhanced geothermal to 20. But 50 would be really good, because it's a kind of source that you don't have You're not depending on the weather or the time of day for it. And probably we can see some flexible geothermal. It would cost a little more, but it would be very valuable to have that. Uh, you still want to have multiple sources of renewable generation, but I think geothermal is really poised in not too distant future to be a major part along with wind and solar.
Fred, when you compare geothermal, enhanced geothermal with small nuclear plants, timing and cost, could you give us a few comments on that?
Yeah, a few comments I could go on and on about nuclear. Nuclear has a kind of hype wave that it's living on right now. But nuclear, the way I would describe nuclear is kind of a Jenga tower of very complicated technologies that all have to fit together. You have the new kinds of uh, power plant designs using all kinds of different approaches. Some of them, a lot of them are really old approaches that are kind of being brushed off and brought back to do different things than the traditional light water reactors do, with different kinds of fuel and different kinds of, moderation, all those technical things. A lot of very complicated things to get the reactor itself to run. And you still have to deal with nuclear waste. You have to deal with mining issues, transport, security, proliferation, safety. All of those things are still involved with nuclear. But the other really important thing about most of the new nuclear designs is they require kind of fuel that's not yet available at commercial scale. The HALEU, high assay, low enrichment uranium fuel, which is up to a 20% enrichment level instead of the more traditional 5% enrichment level for LEU, low enrichment uranium, which is what almost all the power plants run now. That fuel is not easy to make. It's very expensive to make. And while the federal government is totally pouring as much taxpayer dollars as they can into that development, good question about whether it will be available and when it will be available at scale. I would say the earliest, even under the unreasonable expectations of the current federal administration, where we would see sufficient fuel to support a big nuclear build-out would be 10 years from now. We can do geothermal a lot faster. It doesn't require a separate fuel source. The heat is literally under our feet everywhere. The turbines are really simple. We don't have to invent any new technology and prove it out and put it on the grid. That power is going to happen from geothermal. So that's the first start of it. The second point is really important. There's no way that new nuclear can cost anywhere near as little as solar, wind, batteries, and soon geothermal. Just no way. The technology is too complicated and requires too many pieces, and the fuel and this really much higher fuel cost. My and not just me saying this. There's a nuclear engineer named Michael Seeley who's done some very interesting YouTube videos and has an online cost calculator showing that the cost of new nuclear, depending on whether you build the old big power plants, the AP1000 type ones like the Vogtle plant in Georgia, those are going to cost $150 to $200 a megawatt hour. These new, quote, advanced reactors using sodium, whatever the moderator is, and all the other issues, $200 to $300 a megawatt hour. New geothermal, $100 a megawatt hour and going down. So the cost gap is not one that can ever be closed, no matter how much our current administration may claim that that's going to happen.
Mark,
It
you
looks
had a
like Rep
question?
Gambit has a question also or a
Yes.
comment.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was going to be one of the questions I was going to ask. So, would you send me a link to the YouTube video that you were just talking about?
Sure. If I can do it here while I'm talking, I'll put it in the chat while we're talking.
Okay. The other question I had was around the availability of the turbines needed for geothermal. Is it as backed up as the turbines for the gas plants?
Not as backed up as the big gas plant ones are, which right now, if you want to buy a big new combined cycle turbine, 2032, and you're going to be paying 3 times as much as it would have been 5 years ago.
Yep.
So the turbines are turbines. They're the most of these ORC organic Rankine cycle turbines are made by a company called Turboden, which is now a subsidiary of Mitsubishi. They've been making geothermal turbines for a couple decades. Anybody who can make a power plant turbine could make these ORC turbines. It would take a couple of years to get geared up, and they're competing for materials and everything else. But I think that given the very strong prospects for geothermal, that the industry will expand their capacity. So it's a bit of a race to get enough turbines in time. But if you're looking at the early 2030s, I don't see any big problems. And those turbines are simpler than the combined cycle or, gas burning turbines, molecule type turbines.
So the superheated version out at Newberry, Quays and those guys, what are the advantage? I mean, is that going to bring the price down as well?
In time, and we don't know because there hasn't been any production at those high temperatures. So it's going to require special materials for the drilling, for the pipes, for the surface equipment. On the other hand, I'm among engineers here. Do we know how to do high temperature, much higher temperature than 700 degree Fahrenheit in boilers and industrial facilities? Yeah, we do. But it will take some time to modify things to create the equipment for the super hot rock geothermal.
And then my last question, I promise. You talked about having geothermal be able to be on demand. What I'd been thinking about until they land that technology is to utilize that energy in electrolyzers, produce green hydrogen, and then when it's needed for the electricity, then I believe there's electrolyzers that don't cost a lot to cycle up and down.
Right. So if you don't need the geothermal late at night and you have a place to use it, sure. I think that those things will fit together pretty well. I don't think of this as being a either or kind of situation. I think there will be plenty of reasons to do, geothermal as well as other renewables to hydrogen. We've seen a big setback with the federal rug pull on the hydrogen hubs, but my friends at the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance are moving forward. And there are projects happening in the Northwest, and there are going to be a lot of industrial uses for hydrogen that will be very valuable, as well as potentially for power. But if you've already got the geothermal for power, you don't really need it for power. Maybe a little bit for peakers. But I think what you're really pointing to is that we have a lot of untapped possibilities and looking at all of the clean technologies together as a group and seeing how they can most effectively provide not just electric power, but all the energy services that we need, and including things like industrial heat and you name it.
Yeah.
Is there you put in a enhanced geothermal system and you extract all that heat from from way down deep. Is there any concern that eventually that'll cool off down there because you're taking
Yeah,
in heat?
it's part of the fundamental game of doing geothermal. A little story about the geysers. The geysers, conventional hydrothermal, and in its own way, gigantic set of, I think, almost 20 different fields actually. They didn't manage it very well. It began in the late 50s and it grew and grew. And in the 80s, they began seeing production decline because they weren't really managing the reservoir. When you extract heat from an area, the heat will eventually be replaced by more heat coming from below, but it takes a while. But you can manage the reservoirs in such a way that you diminish that. And one of the ways to do it is to re-inject water and allow that to hold a lot of the heat. So that's what they began doing probably about 20 years ago at the geysers. They take wastewater from the Santa Rosa area water treatment plants and re-inject it at the geysers. And that's helped stabilize the reservoirs at the geysers. So they're not seeing any more degradation of output. They're also looking at some advanced techniques to do some more drilling and more extraction at the geysers and increase the power output. I'm not really following it that closely, but I think there's some possibility of getting at least a couple hundred more megawatts there. Now, in the enhanced geothermal, it's a different kind of a, and enhanced, these terms are, we hear these terms, but there's actually a whole number of different approaches now. There's something called advanced geothermal, and there's various kinds of open and closed loop approaches. I mean, when you look out there and see what's out there on the landscape, there's a lot of really interesting new techniques evolving. I mentioned the closed loop ones because those will diminish the heat reservoir near the closed loop, which the closed loop reduces the drilling cost and management issues to some degree. And you can also use other fluids other than water to circulate the heat. But the closed loop also does not replenish the circulation around those rocks. So for the enhanced geothermal side, and this is not the same as oil and gas. With oil and gas, you want to pull the molecules out as fast as you can. And typically in oil and gas, excuse me for one moment here. Typically for oil and gas, but especially for gas, most of the gas in a fracking well will come out within 3 years. In a traditional gas well, you just drill into the surface, down below, pull up the gas for maybe 15 years. 3 years and done for gas wells. With geothermal, you want to maintain that reservoir for 10, 15, 20, maybe even 30 years. And you have to do some careful spacing of the production, injection, and production wells and how far apart they are, horizontally and vertically, and how you do the circulation of the cold water and pull up the hot water to maintain a heat balance that doesn't degrade over time. One of the interesting findings of Fervo's Little project in northern Nevada, which is a 3.5 megawatt turbine, is they've been able to maintain the reservoir temperature now for over 3 years at fairly, a little bit of, a degree or two uh, degradation. I think they're around 380 degrees Fahrenheit there. Not very much. They're able to demonstrate the well and kind of reservoir integrity. For the bigger ones, it's still an open issue, but we have people involved in this work are very smart on the geology and also on drilling techniques and reservoir management. There will be some learning. I think, in fact, reservoir management will improve over time, just the way the drilling process itself has improved. So we'll see some areas which are disappointing. We'll see some areas that perform better than average. And I mean, this is just true of all new technology when you apply it. And eventually it'll become more efficient and less costly. But I think there's a reasonable case to be made. Vervo's not aiming for a 30-year well life on that first 100 megawatts. They want to be sure they get 10 years out of it and then see how far they can go. But going beyond that, these enhanced geothermal sites want to get at least 20 years, in part because of the way project finance works and also material use for, the wells and for the turbines and all the rest of it. A 20-year plus reservoir is a real possibility, but we won't know for another 20 years how well it works.
Tracy had his hand up.
Yeah.
Bakken, they use abandoned wells to dump frac water under pressure. And, the geology notices that. So you get magnitude 2 and 3 earthquakes that are caused by pumping waste products into the ground under pressure. That tells us that geology is not totally predictable and totally solid. So the buildup for my question is, do we know that traditional geothermal and enhanced geothermal have resulted in stable geology, or are we upsetting geostructures that we don't really know everything about?
Yeah, there's a really good, a very important question, and there are a lot of pieces under that surface. First, on drilling, just referring first to oil and gas, there are very few in the US anyway, and Canada, instances of any serious seismicity because of the drilling. That's typically going pretty deep couple miles deep, and well below the surface, there is seismicity. And this is, and I think responsible E&P developers keep a close eye on that. You don't want to inadvertently cause earthquakes that would cause disruption at the surface. They often are in places where there's a lot of natural seismicity anyway. When we look at geothermal is going deeper, but of course you have to drill through the entire, all the layers down to get that far. And there is a very strong degree of attention being paid to the drilling part, both at the Forge project and at Fervo's project in Utah and at Newberry. They're very closely monitoring local seismicity. US DOE and other agencies have a kind of a strategy for seismic management called the stoplight system. If you're below a certain level, let's say magnitude 2, you're in the green area. If you're between 2 and 3, you're in the yellow area. Fervo will, a couple times a year as they're doing drilling, have actually stopped for a few hours when they got into the lower part of the yellow and made sure that nothing was, going to be bad. If you have something in the red, then you have to stop and really back up and reconsider what you're doing. But that has not happened. And in the area in Utah where Forge and Fervo are, there's a lot of natural seismicity. So they have published a lot of information that compares what the drilling impact has been versus natural seismicity. And like I said, both at Utah and at Newberry, they're very, very closely monitoring that and making sure things don't get out of hand. I was at the Mountain West Geothermal Consortium kickoff meeting in Salt Lake City last month, and I ended up with a long discussion with Jim Faulds, who recently retired as the Nevada State geologist. He's still teaching and a geology professor at the university. And his view of it is that, when you're dealing with rocks, there are always surprises. So so that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is about produced water. This is a big issue for oil and gas, especially in Oklahoma and the Permian Basin, where produced water is the stuff that comes out of the pipe when you're drilling and fracking. And you then can't just leave it on the surface because it's full of all kinds of bad stuff. So it typically has just been re-injected. The re-injection process is the one that really causes the problems. And they've had pretty significant problems, especially in Oklahoma. Geothermal does not involve any kind of produced water reinjection. But one more thing I should mention, there has been some exploratory work on more traditional hydrothermal, geothermal all around the world. And in a couple of places, things went very wrong. In Korea and also in Europe, a couple of instances where geothermal drilling caused severe surface earthquakes, not enough to, topple buildings down, but really severe enough to make people think that this was not a good thing to do. We have a better approach, I think, a more informed approach to the geology in the U.S. drilling industry by and large because we have to. So while I think seismicity is an important issue, especially in a place like Oregon that has a lot of different geological zones and features, nonetheless, it's a manageable issue.
Nice catch.
Well, Fred, it's almost 1 o'clock. Do you have time for another question or so?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, well, I have one.
Okay.
Federal government support of enhanced geothermal. Where are we on that?
Oh, they love geothermal because it involves drilling. They don't consider it renewable because renewable is not energy, according to this administration. But they do love geothermal, and that's fine. Chris Wright, the Secretary of Energy, his company was an investor in Fervo. Kyle Houseveit, the new Undersecretary at DOE, responsible for all the drilling stuff and also for Bonneville and the other power marketing administrations, is a gas engineering guy. He worked at Devon Energy, big gas developer. He was on a Fervo advisory committee. They love geothermal. The Democrats love geothermal too. The House of Representatives, that battleground, passed a really good combination bill last week on geothermal development to direct DOE and other agencies to do some things. And I think that bill will pass the Senate as well. it's hard to find a bad, a showstopper on geothermal. The big issues are how do you find the finance to do it, and how do you find the right rocks to do it in? And then we're going to have to face up to issues like cumulative impact. We don't want any community to be a sacrifice zone for geothermal, just like any other resource. But we have a lot of opportunity to put it in places where it makes a lot of sense and to spread the risk, basically, and to avoid issues with critical habitat and with, we don't want to mess up people's hot springs. We don't have to do geothermal near those. There's we have a lot of options here. And I'm pleased to say this is the one area of energy right now where there's a pretty broad, truly bipartisan support, and there should be.
Well, thank you, Fred. And thank everyone for attending. If anyone needs a professional development hour for their engineering career, please let me know. Mike Unger at Comcast.net. So thank you all, and hope to see you next month. We haven't gotten a speaker quite yet, but we're working on it. So.
Awesome. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Great presentation, Fred.
Yeah, good stuff, Fred.
Thank you, Fred.
Indeed.